this seems to be what they're doing now, is they're slowly intruding on our gun rights. We look at what Senator Cornyn has done with the Senate and passing these new red flag laws, where if your boyfriend or girlfriend has domestic violence, you can't have a gun. I could report you and the cops could confiscate your weapons, which would be a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights.
No due process.
So you have to go prove you're innocent. But here's what's fascinating, I think people are missing. They realize they can't go door to door and take your guns. They realize they can't make a law and outlaw guns. So they're going to find the line where they can take guns from as many people as possible and make as many things as illegal as possible. Bump stocks. They're going to say you can't have a gun that has over 12 rounds in the magazine. And what'll happen is slowly but surely they'll limit your ability to own and carry these weapons, so the amount of the population that has guns is so low that nobody will be able to stand up and defend these rights anymore.
Right.
Studio 1-3 presents the Constitutional Corner with your host, Craig McMichael.
Good evening and welcome back to the Constitutional Corner. I'm your host, Craig McMichael. I'm here with my co-host, Mark Hogan, and today we're going to have an interesting conversation about the Second Amendment and guns. Mark, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing good, Craig. How are you?
I am alive and well.
I've been looking forward to this show, the second show of the Constitutional Corner. We're diving into the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which reads verbatim, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed."
Shall not be infringed.
And that is one of the most hotly debated amendments there are.
This is a hot one that a lot of people discuss and they have different opinions. And I want to point out first off, from my understanding, and what I want to share with you tonight is the Constitution does not create laws. It does not create rights that we have. The Constitution guarantees rights. And the founders, when they talked about the Constitution and when they wrote the Constitution, they really pushed for natural law. And so there are really two dividing factors in the Second Amendment. You kind of break it down into two sections. The first one is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So let's kind of talk about that for a second and break down militia. You know, Mark, in your eyes, what is a militia to you?
Well, a militia to me is in today's vernacular, a government entity regulated by government entities of what you can do and what you can't do, and the uniform you wear and the issued gear that you've got. However, in the late 1700s, a militia was argued and specified that a militia was the people. The people were the militia. Am I right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You could actually change the word militia to people in that sentence. When you talk about the founding and the Constitution being written, there were a lot of people that didn't agree with the actual Constitution that became the Anti-Federalist. They actually pushed for the Bill of Rights. And there were a lot of reasons behind this. In the early days of the Revolution, Boston had 16,000 residents. The British put 4,000 troops there. You had only a militia with the U.S. colonies of the people that stood up and fought Great Britain, which had the most powerful standing army in the world. And they spent 8 years fighting this military, and they understood the dangers that a national military, a government-controlled military, could provide. And so the Anti-Federalists ensured the Second Amendment got written into the Constitution, right, because the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, under enumeration of the federal powers, gave the federal government the right to make a standing army and to maintain that standing army. And it actually states in there that they can call up the militia as part of their standing army.
Right.
So when the founders wrote the Second Amendment, it was more about the people would have the right to keep and bear arms to protect themselves, not only for the government, protect themselves in their own livelihood and their everyday lives.
Well, one of the founders, George Mason, in the Virginia Ratifying Convention of June 4th, 1788, and I quote, "I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers.
It's a good statement.
I agree with it.
There's a lot of them from the founders. And, so if we talk more about this amendment, the operative phrase of the amendment is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is the school of thought that you really see today with the individual right to keep and bear arms that the Supreme Court has started to uphold, and we will get into some of those either this episode or the next one if we go into 2 episodes on this.
This is going to have to be a 2-part deal.
It's
30 minutes is not enough to cover the Second Amendment, I promise you that.
30 minutes is not enough. And so you need to understand the mindset of the founders. Where did this amendment come from? Madison, who wrote most of these, actually pulled a lot of this information from the state constitutions at the time. And it's interesting when you go through and read, because after the Revolution, we had the Articles of Confederation, and the states had their own constitutions, and they were utilizing those constitutions to try to keep everything going along until there was a constitutional convention and the government was put in place. And the Second Amendment literally comes almost from the Virginia state constitution. If you find that and read it, it will have a lot of the shall not be infringed, well-regulated militia, individual rights. It talks about these things inside of that constitution.
I think a lot of people get hung up on the well-regulated part of that. And well-regulated, if you look back and you see the debates and the discussion at the time, a well-regulated something or other was not the government says what you can and can't do and taxes the hell out of you for it. Well-regulated was a very a functioning operational success. And you can interpret that a lot of different ways, but they did refer to officers, public officers for these militias. So it was of the people and possibly of the states, because I'll notice that a lot of the state constitutions had requirements that the young males between 18 and 40 or 45, it was varied in different ones, but a lot of them had the commonality of a requirement for young males to acquire a certain weapon and carry a certain amount of powder, a certain amount of lead bullets and other accoutrements in the militia to be ready to defend.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the Pennsylvania state constitution actually discusses in their militia that they had an exemption for religious purposes because they had the largest Quaker population in the continental U.S. at the time. And if you were a member of the Quaker Society, you could actually pay someone to do your militia duty. And I think it lists the monetary value. You have to pardon me, I can't remember it at this time. But that's the important part of this, is people read this now and they try to interpret it in our version of what we understand today.
Right.
And you have to look at what the founders were writing about. The well-regulated militia wasn't talking about a government-controlled militia. It was talking about the people and their right to own guns to protect themselves. It was talking about your right to be free, to rebel against a tyrannical government, to defend your home from an invader, to defend your community. And there have been a lot of court cases over time where this has come up and gone to the Supreme Court. And we're going to discuss some of those. But some of what I want to get into is making sure people understand that the Constitution, I think the Constitution and the Bill of Rights altogether is a little over 4,000 words, 4,400 words or something along those lines. But not everything was able to be put in the Constitution. And there are examples of this in history. So you take your right to self-defense. Nowhere in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights does it say you have a right to self-defense. But this is something as Americans that we fundamentally understand is our ability to have the right to defend ourselves against other people, against animals. It's a funny story. Animals in Colorado not too long ago, there was a gentleman that was with his family and he shot and killed a black bear. He was charged with a felony for doing this because it was out of season for black bear.
Yeah, protected, out of season.
Protected wildlife. He went to court and was found not guilty for rights of self-defense. He had the right to defend himself against this animal, and that's not listed in the Constitution. There are other Supreme Court cases. In the early 1900s, there was a case where the Supreme Court ruled that the parents had the right to guide the raising of their children the best way they saw fit. There's nowhere in the Constitution where it talks about your parental rights over your child, but that is understood as a fundamental right. And a lot of that is touched on the 9th Amendment of the Bill of Rights, and we're going to get into that to a later episode. I don't want to get too deep in this one. But back to the Second Amendment, one of the things the founders feared was the tyrannical oppression of a government. And we have seen a lot of this over time. Part of the revolution started because in 1775, King George ordered the redcoats to come take our weapons, which I believe led to the Battle of Concord. They were going to collect the weapons and the munitions.
Hence the shot heard around the world.
Shot heard around the world.
Well, along the lines of interpretation, I'd like to. I'm all about the quotes, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying not to muff this along the way. From Thomas Jefferson. On every occasion of constitutional interpretation, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates. And instead of trying to force what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, instead let us conform to the probable one in which it was passed. So you got to take yourself back in time to what they were talking about.
Yeah, and Jefferson, our third president, had a lot of good thoughts and policies. One of the founder fathers that really helped push this along, and it really goes back to that word militia. And today when I talk to people, a lot of people try to say the militia is like the National Guard. You need to be part of your state militia to own a weapon, to have certain weapons, that the weapons we should be able to own are just for hunting or whatever it may be. I'll tell you, from the founders' point of view, the National Guard would have been a federal military. It's controlled by the government. The weapons are issued by the government. The uniforms are issued by the government. The soldiers are paid by the government. The National Guard that we know today is not what the founders would have considered a militia.
Right. It stands against everything the Second Amendment was meant to enforce.
That's correct. And technically, in today's world, we don't really have any militias anymore. We have the ability, through our right, our constitutional right to own and bear arms, to form a militia amongst ourselves if we wanted to. And on the flip side of that, you get people that will argue, well, I need rocket-propelled grenades and tanks to be able to fight the military.
And they'll point to, shall not be infringed.
Shall not be infringed. I should be able to own whatever I want. I'll tell you, from my interpretation of the Constitution, that's not true. There are limits on the weapons that you can own.
And who can own them?
That's correct.
In certain cases.
You see this in other amendments. You take the First Amendment. A lot of people think freedom of speech is just outright. But we know in today's society there are certain things you cannot say. You can't go into a court and perjure yourself. There are certain speech or thoughts that you cannot express. And there are other ones that you can. There's always a compromise that we accept as a society to allow this.
And generally, it's you can't cross a line where you're infringing on someone else's rights or downright attacking someone.
That's correct. But I will tell you, historically, there are examples of a militia being able to beat a military, even a modern military. Could you and I and all of our neighbors get our pistols and shotguns and rifles and stand up and beat the U.S. military? No, that's never going to happen. They have tanks, they have jets, they have drones, they have everything that we don't. It's about the amount of punishment. You see this historically. You look at the Vietnam War. The American military in the Vietnam War was far superior to the Vietnamese military.
We never lost a battle.
We never lost a battle, but they made it so costly that we left. You look at the Afghan War in the 80s with the Russians and Afghanistans. They were riding horses around, attacking tanks and helicopters, and they made it so costly for the Russian army that they actually left Afghanistan. You can see this today in the country of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine has far more advanced weapons than what we would have here, but they're making it so costly. I'm actually reading reports of Russian soldiers that are refusing their enlistments to go into Ukraine to fight because they don't understand the point of the war. And when a country can't get its people to suppress or fight another people, then the people vying for freedom will win. And at the end of the day, the Second Amendment is all about protecting your right to be able to protect your freedom. If you lose this amendment, if this amendment goes away and they take our guns, there will be nothing standing in the way of a police state or government that will defy every law that we have and take away every natural right that you're born with, and it will suppress you.
Hear, hear. So what's next?
Next, let's talk about some of democide as a word I've bumped into in some of my research of this, and that really...
That's a new one on me.
Yeah, what the word, it's kind of like genocide. What the word means is any form of killing that a government performs. And so we'll talk historically about countries that took guns away from their people. The Ottoman Empire took guns away in 1911. Shortly after that, I think 1915 to 17, they executed 1.5 million Armenian people. This is inside of modern-day Turkey. The Soviet Empire, 1929, Stalin took guns away from the people. And we all know what he did. I believe it's 40 million people over the course of the next 10, 15 years. And Stalin was so methodical about it, he actually had something that he called the second death, where after he killed you, he would erase all existence that you were ever born. They would cut you out of pictures. They would destroy all documents of your birth, anything that proved that you were ever in existence on the planet. The Chinese government in 1935, Mao took guns away from their population. They ended up killing over 60 million people. Germany in 1939 took guns away from their population.
We all know what happened there.
It's always fascinating. You see these videos from World War II where they get the Jewish populations and they line them up and shoot them. And people watch this now and they think, why didn't they fight back? Why didn't they resist? They had no means to fight back. They had no means to resist.
There were pockets of resistance, organized resistance that we were helping here and there, but they could only do so much. It was mainly guerrilla warfare, derailing trains and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's hard to stand up to an army that's superior. Cambodia is another example, 1956. The killing fields of Cambodia, they made some movies about that.
The brutal Pol Pot.
And then a modern example that I like to remind people of is Australia. We all like to think of Australia as this democracy that's free. They took their guns away. Now, I believe in Australia, and I could be wrong in this, but I believe you can still own a muzzle-loaded weapon and a shotgun that has less than 5 rounds. But what was fascinating is they took the guns away, and now they've really lost their right to protest. And they saw this during the COVID infections. When they got locked down, people took to the streets to protest, and they were brutally put down by the Australian government for these protests.
Right.
So this is just examples that we can look at through history to remind us that, are there sacrifices we make with guns? Yes. Is there gun violence in the U.S.? Yes. I believe the last statistic I saw was in 2020, there were around 45,000 deaths in the United States from
over
guns.
Half of those are suicides.
54% of those were suicides. And then a large percent of those are inner city killings, things like that.
A lot of those are self-defense. A lot of those are by police.
That's correct. Self-defense is a big one. Police, not so much. There are officers that shoot people, but the numbers are not that high. And it's fascinating because when you watch the news, you see these school shootings, and while these things are tragic, they're really limited if you talk about the number of schools that are in U.S., the amount of kids that go to school every single day.
Well, you've got to ask yourself, why is this being pushed when the numbers don't bear that out? The big bad AR-15 and the like weapons account for 3% of the gun deaths, and half of those are in defense of oneself.
Yeah, it's interesting because people always bring up the AR-15. I personally love it when people call it assault rifle. It's arm light
They
rifle.
still do that.
Yeah, it's not an assault rifle. The AR-15 actually came out in the early 1960s. It was sold to the government. It was open for civilian sale, I believe, in the late 60s. The gun's been around for a long time. And I'll tell you something interesting from my personal life. I could be crazy, but I recall going to school in the early 90s in high school. In the parking lot, at any given day, you could see at least 5 to 10 guns in the back of pickup trucks hanging in the windows, deer rifles and shotguns. We never had school shootings. We never had a problem with people going out to the car and getting their gun and shooting somebody they were upset with. What we need to talk about is what changed in society. Why did this become an issue? And what is the government trying to do now? Are they trying to really protect us by limiting our rights to own, carry, and bear weapons? Or are they trying to get control over the populace?
Well, on one hand, it seems like gun rights are under attack from all sides, from the government, from the media, from social media and big tech. And on the other hand, they're coddling the criminal. They're letting them out with no bail all over the country. And gee, what could go wrong, right? Correct?
Yeah, you know, a lot of that is, it's amazing that you have people that are felons that have a gun, and I don't know how that's possible because it's illegal for a felon to own a gun. Little facetious humor there, but really what we need to understand is that criminals don't follow laws. We should see this with the drug laws and any other laws we've passed. People that want to do bad things are going to do bad things. And it's interesting when you look at the government, you look at cases like Fast and Furious, where the government was somehow smuggling guns to the cartel on the border to try to raise violence. I haven't really dug into it.
And then it was covered up. You have to ask yourself, why is this happening, right? Why are they pleading the fifth? Why are they sealing those records? I mean, think for yourself. You don't have to be right or left, but just try to look and see what's going on instead of being told what to think all the time.
Well, it's interesting to me. You see our leading politicians and people in the media today talking about we don't have the right to defend ourselves. We don't have the right to own a gun to protect our family. Call the police, who the cops do a wonderful job, but do you really want to wait 20, 30 minutes for a police officer to show up at your house, or do you want the ability to defend yourself? But these same government officials will take your tax money and utilize it to buy weapons to send these to other countries so those people can fight and do whatever they're doing in their country.
Right.
So other people can have guns, just not our people having guns.
Well, we have billions of dollars go to Ukraine so the civilians can have weapons, and a lot of those are automatic.
A lot of them are automatic, and automatic is always up in the air. I think some places you can own an automatic weapon right now. Nevada, maybe. You have to pay a lot of money to get a permit to do it.
The hoops are unbelievable to own an automatic weapon.
It is unbelievable, but automatic weapons have been around for a long time. I think you had mentioned earlier before the show that.
Right.
What was the first automatic weapon you found?
Well, automatic being a relative term.
Yeah.
The first one I could find, as far as assault rifles, automatic weapons, high capacity kind of things. The argument is the Second Amendment was written when they had muskets, so therefore all you can have are muskets. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Leonardo da Vinci, you've heard of him, invented a 12-barreled cannon in the year 1481. The famous Puckle gun, 1718. You were talking 80 years before the Revolution. It only shot 9 rounds per minute, but that was 3 times faster than the average guy with a musket. Muskets were mass-produced, bought by armies, and they were readily available. However, in 1770, the Ferguson rifle, which was a revolving, fast-shooting rifle, was actually used by the British in 1777 at Brandywine and Charleston against the Continental Army. In 1779, we had the Grandini air rifle, which I don't know a whole lot of the details on that, but it was a repeating arm. So the bottom line is the founders envisioned weapons progressing, but it wasn't about the weapon. It was about the sanctity of defense of one's homeland and family.
That's correct. Yeah, it was about your ability to stand up and defend yourself. And like I said earlier, that's not something that's specifically listed in the Constitution, but as the Ninth Amendment will mention, not right. Just because a right is not listed in the Constitution doesn't mean that you don't have it. That's what the founders talked about when they discussed natural law. These are just laws that you were given at birth, the right to do certain things.
Granted by the Creator.
And they couldn't be taken away. Now, we have accepted to sacrifice some of those rights as a society for security. An example of that is a convicted felon. If you get convicted of certain crimes, you can be put in jail or prison. You basically lose all your rights.
Lose your liberty. Yeah.
That's correct. And
that's part of the punishment.
That's part of the punishment. And
you do this crime and you get caught, you're going to lose this. Well, you can't be trusted.
Yeah, and we accept when they get out of prison that these people won't be allowed to own weapons. That doesn't mean they don't get weapons. They don't carry weapons. Suppressing the population from weapons is not the solution to resolving the issues that we have with gun violence in our country today. There are other problems that lead to morality, parenting, and I'm not an expert. I don't want to get into tell people how to live their lives, but taking my gun is not the solution. I didn't do anything wrong. Mark hasn't done anything wrong.
There's no reason why a good, moral, sober, sane individual who hasn't hurt anybody cannot have the means of defending himself.
That's correct. And why is the Second Amendment historically seem to be the only one that you have to prove? And that's what's beautiful about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is these are rights that you have that you don't have to prove. You don't have to go to a government official and say, well, I want to keep a gun because I want to defend against a tyrannical government. You can just say, I want a gun because it's my right to have a gun. You have no say in that right to have a gun, and I'm going to keep a gun.
And even today, you'll have senators and congressmen get up on the floor and say, you don't need 10 rounds to kill a deer. They've got to know better than that. These people are smart enough to have attained that position.
You know, it's interesting you bring this up, and this completely had slipped my mind, but I want to discuss this for a minute. This seems to be what they're doing now, is they're slowly intruding on our gun rights. We look at what Senator Cornyn has done with the Senate and passing these new red flag laws, where if your boyfriend or girlfriend has domestic violence, you can't have a gun. I could report you and the cops could confiscate your weapons, which would be a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights.
No due process.
So you have to go prove you're innocent. But here's what's fascinating I think people are missing. They realize they can't go door to door and take your guns. They realize they can't make a law and outlaw guns. So they're going to find the line where they can take guns from as many people as possible and make as many things as illegal as possible. Bump stocks. They're going to say you can't have a gun that has over 12 rounds in the magazine. And what'll happen is slowly but surely they'll limit your ability to own and carry these weapons, so the amount of the population that has guns is so low that nobody will be able to stand up and defend these rights anymore.
Right.
And not when I was in school, but I've read stories. They used to have gun classes in high school.
They had marksmanship classes, and
that's part of the problem.
Put on by the NRA. The big bag boogeyman NRA would have classes in certain high schools that you could take as an elective.
That's part of the problem that I think as a people we face today, is so many people live in a fear of these guns. And you know, FDR said it perfectly. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We are afraid of guns because we don't understand them. Now, I have a leg up on some people. I was a weapons instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I spent years working on the rifle ranges. I had the privilege of my tour in Afghanistan. I got to shoot 88 millimeter mortars, Mark 19 automatic grenade launchers, 50 cals, you name it. I got to handle, shoot, and enjoy these weapons, so I feel very comfortable with them. I started learning to shoot at a young age. I always handled guns at a young age, but I understood the safety behind them. We have now that people don't know anything about guns. They just know
the rules for the rest of it.
That's right. They're just dangerous. And it's fascinating that a lot of the politicians that are making these rules for us, they live behind walls. They have armed security guards. They're not worried about the threats and the violence that we deal with day in and day out in this society.
And their districts are burning down around them.
That's correct. So really, that's a good start for today. I mean, I want to talk about some of the laws. I don't know if we're going to, next episode, maybe get into some of the actual laws. We'll talk about the National Firearm Act from '34, the Federal Firearm Act, the Gun Control Act, U.S. versus Miller, the new Heller Law, the law out of New York, and we can really dive into some of these constitutional laws and discuss where they went.
Right. I'm looking forward to getting into all that. How it's been challenged and adjudicated by the Supreme Court. There's been arguments all over the place, and we'd like to see what in the world happened. So thank you, Craig, and thank you. We're really grateful that you've joined us today. Don't miss that coming up. We get in the second half of the Second Amendment episode, and leave a comment down below. Hit that like button. Send us cookies. You know the drill. And that's the way we see it. What do you think?